Hey, Pavana, you can just get started when you are ready, okay?
Okay.
I think Dr. Pan and Dr. Gong, they have meeting today, so we may not want to wait for them. Yeah.
Okay.
So go
Sure.
ahead when you're ready.
Good morning, everybody. Today, I will be presenting a paper that was accepted at the SICOM in 2020. The paper is titled Concurrent Entanglement Routing for Quantum Networks, Model and Designs. Here's a brief agenda of today's talk. First, I'll talk about some basic introduction about some quantum terminologies. Then I'll talk about the entanglement routing algorithms. Then I will discuss some experiments. And finally, I will conclude the paper. So laying out some foundation about the quantum networks. So first of all, the quantum network is mainly built by the basic building blocks of quantum networks as the qubits, like how we have the binary bits of 0 and 1 in our normal networking. The quantum networks has the qubits where it can take the value between 0 and 1. So it can exist in a state of 0 and 1 simultaneously. So that's the difference about qubit. That's the basic foundation of quantum mechanics. So in a quantum network or a quantum internet, it's just an interconnection of all the quantum processes, which are just our end devices, which have the quantum capabilities. And you have some repeaters or hubs that can generate, exchange, and process the quantum information. And the information that is transmitted in such networks are all in the form of qubits. And also all the qubits that are transmitted are stored in the quantum memories, such as special memories allocated for storing the quantum bits. And this does not replace the internet that we have today. The classic internet exists, and this quantum network is just a supplement as an addition to what we already have. So before I go into the more details, I will introduce something called the quantum entanglement, where let's say you have two qubits, which usually have their own state. Let's say so one of it is spinning up and the other is spinning down. There is some kind of a relation, like correlation between these two qubits. So for example, you can imagine that there are two flaming coins such that when they keep spinning in such a way that you do not know what is the end result when they stop spinning. So they're correlated in such a way that if you want to know the result of one of it, you can just stop one of the coins, either the left one or you can stop the right one, and you'll automatically know what is the result of the other one, because they have some kind of a special relation between them. This kind of relation usually happens when these photons or electrons, basically the physics level, when they're created together, they have this kind of a special connection between them, that they have similar attributes. They have some kind of a polarization, which are so close that even if these bits eventually move far away, they will still have this kind of a connection where one will tell you details about the other one. It can be imagined like maybe twin babies. When they're born together. They have so many similar things between them. Like if something happens to one of them, the other one kind of already knows that. And maybe like eventually in life they move far apart. They still have that, like they're in different countries. They still have some kind of a connection between them. So this kind of relation is called the correlation between the quantum bits. And using this, we can entangle them together. So especially if, let's say, two of these bits are moved very, very far away from each other, they're separated by a very large distance. Even with the distance, it doesn't matter. The correlation between them will still exist. So this is a very important property using which we can establish the entanglement. So how is this relevant to us? Is, let's say that you have Alice and Bob who want to talk to each other, and they have the quantum bits, the qubits, the red ones marked over here, and they want to send some information. They do not have to worry about the physical communication channel or the security issues that arise arises with it, because they already have some kind of entanglement between them. So they can just send the photon via an optical fiber, and they can try multiple times to establish an entanglement. And once an entanglement is established, one will become like dependent on the other, and they can easily be able to send information together. And the more relevance of this would be the applications that we use. For example, the data bit transmission that we need becomes perfectly secure. You do not have to encrypt them, especially because the data has some physical attributes which gives the security. And all the authenticity and integrity is already integrated in it, and the perfect confidentiality is guaranteed. One example of this is the quantum teleportation or the quantum key distribution, where as opposed to the public key cryptography that we know, where a public key is generated and distributed, the quantum key kind of works in a little similar way, where let's say you have Alice and Bob, and they look at their photons or their electrons, and based on that, they can generate a key, and that key can be transmitted to each other. So anytime between any communication reception between them, if there is any eavesdropper that tries to intercept the packet and they try to do some malicious activity, then the state of the photon is going to change. Like we know the Schrodinger's cat, for example, the state is so unpredictable that anytime, even if the message is, even if you try to measure the state of this message in between, then the state is going to change. It will no longer remain the same. So at that time, when Bob tries to decrypt the message, he sees that this has already been intercepted. So he knows that there is some eavesdropping that happened in between. So they know that there's a security threat, so the message does not have to be completely sent. Only in the case when Alice sees that the identical key that she and Bob shares are not intercepted, they are still the same even after sending it across, then Alice will try to put her message into a quantum bit. She tries to entangle it along with this qubit, and then she sends it to Bob. When Bob receives this message, he has his same identical key. He uses that to decrypt the message, and then the information can be successfully transmitted between these two. So this is a very important security aspect because of which we are considering the quantum networks very extensively these days for communication. The other thing with this is, like I was saying, this does not replace the communication systems we have today. It just acts as a supplementary to it, because especially when you send any special message with it, that will go through the normal networking channel, the internet that we have. Only the quantum bits have to be sent through the quantum channels. The remaining goes through the normal channels that we have. So this becomes even more practical to use it in our systems today. So given all these applications.
Hey, Pavana, can you go back to the previous slide?
Yeah.
So you mean if you have an attacker in the middle,
yeah.
And so this attacker can intercept this qubits. So what happened? You mean the Bob will be able to detect it, or I mean, so you know the security, right? Security means that you can either modify it or you can detect it. I mean, there are different meanings of security. So what do you mean by security here using the quantum here?
Okay, let me show one example here. Okay, this is a very big example. Please ignore the pictures. What I mean by the interception happening of the packet is, let's say Alice was trying to send hi to Bob, and she looked at her own photons, and based on the polarization of each of the ions, she was trying to generate a key, and she adds the key to the message and encrypts it and sends to Bob. Before she sends that, so okay, before the information is sent, just when the first stage when the key exchange is happening, we see that Alice and Bob will have the same keys because they had the same photons which were created together. They have the entanglement, so they have this exactly same keys. And for some reason, when she's trying to send this information, let's say Alice had this as her key, and if any eavesdropper was trying to just read the packet, it does not necessarily have to change it. Even if they try to measure what is the state of your quantum bits, then the quantum bits will change their state in such a way that when Bob looks at it, the bits are going to be completely different. Even by just measuring it, it will be different. So in this case, Alice will know that the key that I have and what Bob is having is different. So she can send like a 2-bit additional message as a normal message, not as a quantum message, but a normal message to let Bob know that, hey, there was an eavesdropper. So I'm pretty sure that your key also has changed because mine is like looking different. So
you mean if you have a eavesdropper, then the admins will be able to know that they will be able to detect the existence of such an attacker. And then the analysts need to well tell the Bob saying that, well, actually we will receive different types of keys. So are they going to retransmit, or what they're going to do to ensure security here?
okay, so in that case, what they will do is, first of all, when the thing in quantum is, once you send this kind of a message, it's kind of like teleportation. So it's going to be destroyed at the source, and Bob is going to be will be receiving it. He'll try to recreate it. So if Alice notices that there is a problem with it, they will have to change the state and they start over again. Because if Alice changes anything in her, Bob will automatically know that because they are entangled in such, because they were created together, they're entangled.
Oh,
So,
okay. So,
yeah.
so you mean that, so whenever Alice change the key, actually without any communication, the Bob will also receive the updated key, right?
Actually, yes, exactly. Bob's
Because of the
already
program. Okay.
Yeah.
And then why? So how can that be happen? Because, you know, it should be at the very beginning. Did Alice and Bob do some kind of special message exchange, or how can they ensure that? I mean, at the very beginning, or you can say, what capabilities do Bob and the eavesdropper separate from each other? I mean, they should have different knowledge, right? Bob and the eavesdropper, they have different knowledge so that Bob will be able to know the Alice's key, but the eavesdropper cannot do that, right? So I was just I'm curious about, is there any additional step at the very beginning so that while the Alice and Bob can set up such kind of collection?
Yes. So that actually happens at the entanglement step itself, when they're trying to entangle together using their qubits. It's at the same time where this kind of key generation happens.
Okay. So the K generation here, okay. So you mean that during the K generation stage, Alice and Bob, they have set up such kind of a collection, right?
Yes.
But how do they generate the key here? So do they need a trusted party to generate the key for them, or?
Okay, I got your question. So apparently you do not need such a thing. So if I just look at this picture over here, where let's say that on the left is Alice and right is Bob, and the red dots over here are like the qubits corresponding to, respectively of each other. And in between, let's say you have the quantum source, like maybe a laboratory where you have a microscope where you're trying to entangle the photons together or something. And once the two photons are entangled and they're sent back to each other, they do not have to, the Alice and Bob do not have to do like some special key exchange, like how we do in the public key cryptography. What they do is, once they receive their respective at the ions, the photons or the electrons from the source, they just
but they need to have this kind of a common quantum source, right?
Yes, yes.
Also, this one maybe, you mean they use the telescope to observe something in the sky, or?
Yes. Here they are like using the telescope to, and this telescope acts as a reception, and the one from the quantum source, this telescope acts like the sender, and this telescope acts as the receiver, and they're sending it through the air. They don't. Yeah.
But the attacker, but in this case, the attacker can also receive the eavesdropper can also receive the quantum from this source, right?
So what happens is, even if, like, let's say some okay, so I'll come to your question. I'll answer your question, but just in like I'll say this one bit, where let's say that these things were sent to Alice and Bob through the telescope or however from the quantum source. What Alice and Bob do is they look at the polarization of each of the ions and they try to generate the key based on that. Like, for example, if it has a minus 45-degree polarization, then I will put a 1. If it's plus 45, I'll put a 0, horizontal, vertical, etc. So according to the alignment of the polarization, they generate the key. So that is the reason, because they are like the twins, these both have the same keys. Because even without talking to each other, because they were entangled at the quantum source, they just generated these keys by themselves. And in case if there was an eavesdropper who came in between and he tried to see something, he will not be able to replicate it completely, because the quantum state will change. The moment somebody tries to measure it, the quantum state will already change. So in case of Alice and Bob, this is the first reception. They already received it and they started to measure it. So they will have the same key. So anybody in between trying to do the same thing, they will automatically see a different pattern of zeros and ones. Because the quantum bit, the state keeps revolving with because it can have both 0 and 1, right? So it will keep on changing. So okay, let me try to give you one more example. Instead of key distribution, I can explain this teleportation. Let's say this, it's quite I'll just read it. I know you can see it too. So let's say this Alice had this yellow color photon. Now Charlie is a third guy who has this paired or the entangled photons A and B, and he wants to send one to Alice and one to Bob, and he does that. But Alice and Bob's relationship is like cordial, but they're very distant. They don't have to like completely like talk, but they're entangled in such a way that any change that happens with Alice's photon will automatically reflect in Bob's, or whatever happens to Bob's will reflect in Alice's, because they have correlation because they're entangled. Now, like let's say the blue photon that Alice received and whatever yellow she already had, they both have this kind of a collision, and they change. And let's say both the photons are annihilated because Alice is trying to measure that. So now Alice was trying to measure this event, and because of that, this kind of annihilation happened, which means that same thing also happened on Bob's, but Bob didn't know that. And Bob didn't even do anything to his photons. It already happened because Alice did the same thing with hers. So whether Bob cannot determine that something already changed because he didn't even measure it yet. So what Alice can do is she sends him like a 2-bit of information over the normal optical fiber, and in which she sends that this kind of a change has happened. But when Bob receives that, and when he checks or when he tries to measure his own photons, he sees exactly the same thing has happened to his whatever happened to Alice. So this kind of a teleportation, like how, I mean, in science fiction, I know teleporting means, one person goes to the other place without exactly like moving to it. So this is like in the quantum way, instead of the person moving, just his information is going there without without doing much, because something in me changes, something in him is changing too.
Oh, so the Charlie here, in the diagram, the Charlie is more like the quantum source, right?
Yeah.
So the Alice.
Kind of.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Actually, like a little bit, yes. Technically, like this figure, it means that like Alice and Bob were nothing. They didn't even have anything existing, but the quantum source tried to send them like the first thing. That's what this means here. But in this, it means that they already had a photon, but Charlie tried to send them, like, tried to entangle them with something else.
Oh, okay. I see. Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so because of that reason, because they have this kind of this teleportation that they can do between them, any kind of eavesdropping between at any phases, whether it was during this transmission or before they were trying to measure it, if anyone tries to measure it, then the same effect kind of will happen. on both the sides. So it is easy for one of them to know that something happened on the other side. So then they know that now it's no longer safe and I do not have to send the information.
Okay.
Okay.
That's good. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Let me. Okay. So yes, so this is how this kind of entanglement happens, and they're able to establish a quantum entanglement. And the other thing is this kind of entanglement where they try to become this kind of entangled may not happen at one go, is what they say. They say that multiple attempts might be needed sometime. And these were the applications we were talking, and I think we just saw the teleportation and quantum redistribution, but there are several other such applications where we can use the quantum mechanics to establish a quantum network. And now there is one disadvantage to doing this. One is that if you have like a channel length is too big, like if your Alice and Bob are located very, very far away from each other, then the success rate of you sending the message over will exponentially decrease with the channel length. So there could be like two solutions that you can use. One is, let's say you have several parallel channels. So if the transmission failed on one, maybe you can use the other channel. So this is one. But the more efficient one would be to use like a relay or a repeater between them. So it's like the repeater we use in our classic communication networking, where you use a repeater to repeat the information. It's in the same way that we use quantum relays over here or quantum repeaters to do the same job. A little more details on how these kind of repeaters in quantum text work is first is you kind of prepare locally where you have Alice and Bob, and in between them you have a repeater. And let's say you have the quantum entanglement connection between Alice and the repeater in this way. So locally, you already built some local entanglements between you and the immediate repeater that you have, the closest one. And in the second step, you try to do the measurement. Bell state measurement is nothing but the measurement we were talking about in the other picture, where you read or like you measure what is the polarization of each of your bit. If it's minus 45, you set a 1, plus 45 with vertical, it is 1 again, something like that. So you do that measurement. It's a lot more complex than just that, but I just said it the most simpler way. I think they have several papers which propose this Bell state measurement initially. So basically, they try to do this measurement. And once they do this kind of a measurement, then we know that the state is going to change in them. So after you measure this kind of a state, what actually happens is it feels like as if now Alice and Bob have a direct entanglement. So that's what the repeater did. It's just using the same concept of entanglement that they had. It's just that it kind of like passes it on. So these ions, so in the first picture, we see that these two qubits didn't have any entanglement. They were just in the same repeater. So the second step, when you try to do the measurement, you're trying to establish an entanglement kind of between the two of them. And you see, you did like a direct connection, straight connection between Alice and Bob now. So this is as good as having Alice and Bob talk to each other directly. So in this way, we can establish a route like this, and you can build your routing table like in this fashion. Like you can put relays in between, and you can try to build entanglement connections between your source and destination. In terms of the example that I was giving earlier about teleportation, like let's say that Alice and Bob have entanglement already. Let's say that this line is entanglement, and the red is the qubit, and green color is the data bit that Alice wants to send to Bob. Like maybe she wants to say hi or something. So before teleportation, they were just entangled in this way. Now what Alice does is, after they know that they both have the identical keys, and so far nobody has done any measurement because both both Alice and Bob have the same keys still. If somebody had done some measurement in between, then there would be annihilation, and either Alice or Bob would have seen that their bits change automatically. So since nothing of that kind has happened, Alice knows that it is safe, and she tries to put this data qubit along with her entangled qubit, and she sends that information to Bob through the channel. So now after teleportation, now Bob has the information that Alice wanted to send to him initially. And this is one example. The other is very similar to this Bell state measurement I was saying. It's also called as the quantum swapping, where it's exactly this. The figures B and C is what is happening here. So the other name can be swapping. So before they have entanglement connection between Alice source and repeater and the destination. Now after swapping them or establishing a Bell state measurement and entanglement between them, you have a direct connection from source to destination. So this is the basic job of a quantum repeater, which will be important in establishing a proper quantum network. Now, though this looks very different and good to implement, there are a few limitations to this. One is that the entanglements that you try to create, they decay really, really fast, because the quantum particles, as we know, they keep the polarizations, they keep spinning and they can decay really fast. So the time that they exist can only be between 1.5 seconds to 1 minute, so which means you need to act really, really quick, which will be very difficult when it comes to normal communications, because sending like long information in our networks within that time frame may be a little challenging. So one solution is to use a synchronized communication model where you have like slots. So in your entire channel, you kind of divide slots, and you can make the time slots independent of each other. And then you can create phases per slot, and then you can act according to that. I will explain more about how the synchronization or how the slotting works in the following slides. And the other thing that they talk about here is the qubits that you allocate. For example, over here, you just had Alice and Bob to talk to each other, or here there was just one repeater, and you were able to assign this qubit to entangle with this repeater's qubit. But in real networks, you can have like several channels between them. You can have several other devices, many, like maybe Alice is connected to Charlie, Alice is also connected to somebody else, or there can be so many other, the network can be like much bigger. So at that time, there is a resource contention of using how many qubits. She may have very limited number of qubits. So you have to be really careful of how to allocate the resources according to your requirement. So you would have to limit the number of qubits that you have in a node. A node, when I say node, it can mean the quantum processors, which are just Alice and Bob, the end devices, which have quantum capabilities, or it can also mean the repeaters. So you have to limit the way you do the resource allocation. And also when you have many neighbors and you're building your routing table, you have to be careful about how you do the allocation of the channels to each of the neighbors. So these are the few limitations that you have to keep in mind when you work with quantum networks. So next, I will talk about the system model. This is a basic network model where, let's say here you have your classic computer with internet access. It has a full connection to the internet. Let's say like you have a laptop over here and it's connected to Wi-Fi. And let's say you have a processor here, the quantum processor, which has the quantum capabilities of creating, transmitting the qubits. And this round circle is the node, and each of the red dots correspond to the qubits. Now, as we see, different nodes have different number of qubits. And a dotted line, it can indicate a quantum channel, which are not yet entangled. And if you see a red circle joining another red circle, which means that they're already assigned with the qubits. And once the entanglement is established, the dotted lines become solid lines. So that is what the terminologies will be in the following slides. So here, this is a very basic example of a quantum network where you have several nodes with their own qubits. And we see that there are several channels between the nodes. So for example, we have 2 channels here between 6 and 14, like we have 3 channels and so on, etc. Let's kind of focus, we take a small subset of this node of this network, and let's just concentrate on probably this area, like 11, 7, 3, 9, and 12. Just like, let's take this much and see what exactly happens here. So like I was saying, we have time allocation, we have slots. So in the time slot, we divide 4 phases. We have phase 1 to phase 4, where in each of the phase, some particular action happens. So first of all, we initialize the network where each of the node receives what are the source and destination pairs. Like here, I want to talk from 11 to 3 is my source and destination. Or maybe in the other case, maybe I want to be establishing connection between 7 and 9, or maybe 7 and 3, etc. So for each phase, we'll see what are the source destination pair that I'll be concentrating on in this. So that will be the initialization stage. And next, the phase 2 will be after initializing. Now we know that 11 is the source and 3 is a destination, for example. Now I want to select the paths based on the topology and select which are the source destinations, how to go to the source and destination pair. So maybe from 11, I can say 11, 7, and 3 can be one connection. 11, 12, 9, 3 can be one, or maybe 11, 7, 9, 3, or 11, 12, 9, 7, 3. Like there are so many combinations like this, right? So you can kind of select some path based on your topology and based on what is your source and destination given in this phase. And after that, in your phase 3, you can exchange the link state within your k hop. Like your k hop, your immediate neighbors, or maybe like k is the number of hops that you will specify, maybe 1 hop or 2 hops. So within those k number of hop neighbors, you will exchange your link state and saying, hey, I have a link over here. This is active. I don't have anything here, or something like that. You can share your link state basically with your k hop neighbors. And then in phase 4, once that is sorted, you will connect the existing local entanglements between all of them. So then for now, you can allocate, saying that maybe this is the better way to go, and I will allocate my qubits into this, and I will establish this kind of a connection between them. And according to that, the next step would be in the quantum way, you will have to establish the entanglement. So now you will carefully choose that where do I establish the entanglement and where is it worth doing. So this is the 4 phases. This will be in the more classical communication web, but to explain this in the more detail, maybe we can go through this figure. So let's say in phase 1, the 4 figures are divided into 4 phases. Just walk you through them. In your phase 1, you have these many nodes, and A is your source and B is your destination. Now, all the nodes already are informed of the SD pair because this is your phase 1 and your topology was already set. When offline, you already know what the topology looks like. It is already pre-shared with all the nodes. So now all your nodes already know who is the source and destination pair in this phase. So it is A to B. Now we see the quantum bits are not bounded. They're not already entangled to anybody. So there are no channels we have already allocated. They're just freely just existing with the nodes. We have not entangled any of them. So this is the basic thing that happens in phase 1. We just want to know what everything looks like. Then in the phase 2 is like they also called as the external phase, where all the paths are found. All the solid lines drawn over here from A to B are like each of the node assigns these are the paths that we can take. And according to this, now each node will assign the qubits to the channels according to these paths. And in the phase 3, now we see that each channel may fail or they may succeed. Like as I was saying, when you try to do the quantum entanglement, it may or may not work. So you may have to retry many times. So when you try to do that kind of, try to establish that kind of a connection, it may fail or it may succeed to build an entanglement. If it builds an entanglement, we see a solid line over here. If it doesn't, then you see this cross mark. Maybe it was not successful to do it. So we kind of can ignore. And now this information this is nothing but your link state. This will be transmitted and shared within your k-hop number of neighbors. This would be the phase 3. And in the phase 4 will be internally, what you do is, now I know what is the topology. I know my source and destination. I know how to get there. I want to know what qubit I want to use and how do I internally try to swap them. Like the quantum swapping that we were seeing in the initial slides of the Alice and Bob. Now we try to do them between the two and we try to establish a straight connection. So in node C, we choose these 2 qubits because they're closer to these channels. We allocate this quantum bit to this channel, this quantum bit to this channel, and we establish an entanglement between these 2. And in this way, we see that from A to B, we have a straight path to the transmission. So this is how the phases work, and this will overcome the problem of the quantum qubit decay. Any questions so far?
So
Okay.
so in this phase 4 here, so internally C and D they need to build a collection between two qubits, right? So how do they load? For example, I was curious, this one. So why don't the C load C collect those two qubits here? Why is load C loads that you need to collect here? Collect those two, not this one.
Okay. So the thing is, like, before we try to connect them, when we come to the phase 3, we see that these channels got successfully entangled. This got entangled, but this did not get entangled. This failed. So we don't have.
So you mean that well, you need to load. So this C actually need to load that whether you have a pass, if you collect those two, whether you have a feasible pass to D to B or not. Then you will just say, okay, just this one, this pass, you have a feasible pass to B. So I'll collect those two qubits. Otherwise, so but this one, I mean, looks like it's not very easy because this C actually need to need to maintain a routing table and then need to decide whether there will be a pass towards D, towards B or not. I mean, in internet, this is a very, very difficult. Everyone, most of the time, they will just say, oh, I just load my labels is D and E. So I will just forward my message to D or E because they are my labels. I know that they may have a collection with B. So we'll do this in that way. But now, I mean, I'm not sure whether this is really feasible because it's more like load C need to have a global routing table. And also C needs to load a global state of each link.
Right.
So is there any assumption there? I mean, it looks like, for example, I say that your description has this one, saying that what the link state are shared within K hops. So you mean that, for example, for C, maybe you only you are only load the link state within your K hops. You are not just maintain the global link information. Is that what they're trying to say here?
Okay, so that's a good question. So the protocol, the algorithms that this paper is proposing will have in one phase where you have, because this topology is already known before, you can have like a global server who has the entire topology, all the information, and it can be shared offline with all the nodes in your network. So all the nodes are already aware of what the topology is, what are the nodes and how are they connected. So you have that information with you already. And about the routing table thing that you were asking about, it's kind of yes. Let's say, for example, C. Now, initially, he was already given the topology map offline. He was already given some idea about this. And he already also has some kind of a routing table with him. And I think this paper also mentions that a lot like OSPF can be compared with this. A little bit of OSPF can be compared, where you do have each one of you do maintain some kind of a routing table. Now, for example, C has this thing in his routing table, and when the link states are shared in this phase within this K hops, he already gets an update about which quantum channels got entangled successfully and which did not. So at the end of phase 3, he also updates that in his routing table. Like example, you have 2 more columns in your routing table along with the existing information. You also add 2 more things about what are the qubits you have allocated with them and what are the channels associated with that kind of edge. You can think of this as like a graph, and you can think of these as edges. So C also has information about what channels are there at my edges and which are not there. So at the end of phase 3, even those information are already updated at each node, based on which at phase 4, they can make a decision that why not me connecting this line and why should I connect this line instead. at the end of this phase now, because his table is updated, that this link does not exist. And this would be his path to go. So he will now, at the last phase, he will connect those qubits accordingly instead of the other ones.
Okay. Yeah, I get your point there. Okay, so let's just continue. I think there are. I feel that there should be a lot of challenges here. You know, you just think about according to so here, for example, in the future, for the internet, does that mean that every end device will be like, for example, this in this figure A, B, C, D, E? Is each node corresponding to one specific computer in the future? I mean, I assume that, let's say, quantum computing will be feasible in the future.
Mhm.
Then does that mean that, for example, A, B, C, D, E, they are more like our daily use computers, laptops, things like that? Or is it more like a specialized end node? Because, you know, the internet is very, very large, you know, you have billions of devices.
Right.
So it's very, I kind of felt that it's very difficult for you to have a global, has a single server that is, or has a single table that can store all the link information of billions of devices. It's very, it's too difficult. I'm not sure what is the, maybe there's some underlying assumption behind this quantum. For example, maybe just specific sites. For example, just one city or two city, they have one shared quantum node like this one.
Okay.
Or this is what I, from the practical perspective, or it's just like for special for this quantum computing or communication, just for some specialized small entities. For example, just between university A and university B, maybe you can set up such kind of quantum network.
Okay. I think the experiments, not in this paper, but in general, the advances in quantum have been like, I think, to eventually expand it to like normal classical communication. But I think right now it's more limited to like some smaller distance, I think. But yeah.
So do they have is there any real test bed saying that, for example, you have millions of loads, or you have thousands or even thousands or hundreds of loads, and then you communicate with each other? Do they have those kind of test bed?
No, I mean, I think the IBM's quantum division has like a big test setup like that. And I don't know the company, but I think recently China was able to show some bit of this with space, right? But I think that was on a more large scale. But that is yet to be implemented in normal communications, like maybe between the universities, like you were saying. I don't think that kind of implementation has happened yet. But about the testbed, yeah, like there are the examples that this paper also mentions about the Tokyo QKD network, the Vienna QKD, and the satellite quantum network in China. So these are the ones that this paper and the couple of other papers I read was mentioning, that they have experimentally demonstrated this kind of long distance secret sharing.
Hey, so you mean, so for example, for this figure here, A and C, their distance, so what's the approximate distance between A and C? I mean, the maximum distance. Is it kilometer or just a meter? I think you mentioned that before, right? In some in some
Yeah.
slides, you talk about maybe 1.5 kilometer or things like that. So otherwise, you have decaying issue. Is that so? That's why you want to have a repeater.
Oh, that was actually the time. They would decay within 1.5 seconds
Oh,
or
that's the time.
yeah,
Did
that
you
was the
mention
time.
about the? So how about the distance? I mean, is
The
this? Mm,
the distance actually, they do not give a proper limit as to, within this distance some kind of decay happens. Like I didn't get that exact number as to after how many kilometers I should put a repeater in order to have better success rate. I don't have that number, but I just know that this paper, in their simulations, they were trying to assume as a 1 kilometer.
they are assuming the 1 kilometer between, for
Yes,
example, between two loads, right? A
yes,
and
yes,
B. Okay, okay.
yeah. But in real life, I think it'll be a lot, and I think it'll be a little more than that. I would assume because yeah, the other thing is they use the optic fiber as their channel, right? So I think that gives a little more capability of transmitting a little more long distance before you totally lose out on information. I think.
Yeah, yeah, we can check that. I think distance maybe is also an important concern. You know,
Right.
nowadays, if two computers, their distance, you call it's, I'm not sure whether this quantum qubits transmission is affected by the distance or not. I mean, you talk about the time, the decaying time, that's fine. But I'm just curious what the distance is also a constraint between
Yeah.
two. Yeah, anyway, yeah, just go ahead. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. 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 So I think so. Uh, yeah, it just talks about. I think the paper does say that if you have larger network, which means the average distance will be bigger between the nodes, and then they say for that we need to introduce more time slots to make sure that the information can we can use more repeaters between and use bit more time slots. But yeah, I don't. They haven't mentioned what distance though. Yeah, I can just find this. I can make a note and maybe offline I can check it for you. Okay, so with these discussions, we can see that there are some differences between the quantum networking and the classical networking. One is that we have the slotted time because we have the problem with the decay of your quantum entanglements. So that's why you cannot retransmit failed packet. Like in a classical communication, there are two things you can do. You can probably hold the packet, and then you can buffer it and send it later. You cannot do that here because of the decaying problem, because of the slotting. And also, if there is a failed transmission, you cannot retransmit the packet for the same reason. And the other thing is there are some fixed assignments. So especially after here that we do this kind of establishment, these qubit to qubit entanglements and the qubit to channel allocations are kind of fixed, and we cannot change it in this particular phase again, unless we do the next stage of transmission where we establish again. So that would be fixed. And the state topology, the topology is stable though it is very stable. The entanglement results will be probabilistic because the entanglement sometimes may work or sometimes may not work. So that is like it's a probabilistic thing. So the link states you have dynamic and the static components for your link states. And there are parallel channels. If you have more parallel channels, then you can be more flexible when you're trying to do the Bell state measurements. And they call this as non-additive routing metric because this cannot be added when you're trying to compute the routing metric from one source to the destination. So these would be the few differences. So about this non-additive routing metric, let's say consider that there are two ways of communicating, right? Like you have between A and B, you have C and D with parallel paths to go through, or you have paths which are non-overlapping, like this one, like you have A, C, D, and then you have C prime and D prime. You have two different paths which are non-overlapping. They're disjoint. So the argument could be like, why can we not use this, and why do we have to rely on this kind of parallel communication? So one thing is, let's say that you have these kind of two disjoint paths, and the connections are cut off between like A and C prime, and maybe between C and D, this connection is gone. You see that both of these paths become redundant. I cannot use both of them. I mean, they're of no use. I cannot use both of the paths to get from A to B at all. But instead, if I have a parallel path, then it doesn't matter to me if the connection between one of this connection is gone or one of these connection between C and D is gone. I'm still okay because I have other channels that I can use at the edges to still establish this kind of a quantum route. So this can be called as the width, as to how many number of channels you have between at your edges. And here we see that even if there is some kind of a loss, we can still put some repeaters in between and try to recover these kind of paths, even if some goes down. And one path with width 2, if it has 2 width, then it can deliver 1 qubit, even if there are 3 failed links. There are 3 failed links for here, for example, but still I'm able to successfully transmit the message from A to B. And here in the example, we have like 2 paths and 3 hops to go through. And we see that this kind of design works well for us because even with several link failures, we are still able to establish a connection. So these kind of wide paths means multiple channels. These wide paths are usually preferred. And there's another routing metric that this paper talks about. So the main contribution of this paper that they emphasize is that rather than using the other routing metrics, which are very classical, they say that because they're using quantum networking, they wanted to use some metric which make more sense in using with quantum networks rather than the classical networks. So they introduced something called as the expected number of EBITs, or the expected throughput, and they abbreviated by EXT or ET. So this kind of quantifies the end-to-end path on a network topology. So to see that that there is a connection and hence the throughput will be good. So they use this kind of a formula for that, where Q is nothing but the success probability of each entanglement swapping. When you do the entanglement swapping, how successful it was or not, that is determined by Q. Excuse me. H is your number of hops that you have. W is your width of your network. And P is nothing but your path, of which path that you're taking. So these can be added up and can be multiplied with your success rate, and you can get the throughput. So this is a metric that they will also use in their simulations going forward. And so the basic goal that they want to establish is that they want to maximize the entanglement delivery in every time slot, which is nothing but they want to maximize this ET. They want to maximize the throughput. So to achieve this goal, they propose 2 algorithms. One is called the QPass, where you do offline routing, and then you do a segment-based path repair. When some links are down, you want to establish connection using your parallel ones. So for that, they use a segment-based path repair. And the other algorithm that they propose is called the QCast, which basically does online routing, and it also uses the XOR properties. So they use XOR-based path repair in that. So how exactly QPass works is that, first of all, it's activated with this pre-computed path selection and segment-based recovery. So first you pre-compute some potential good paths between all the source and destination pairs, because you don't know which is the source and which is the destination that you will be using when you start to do the routing. So when you're offline and before this initialization even starts, so you would pre-compute and say that, okay, for A and B, this is the best path. If I want to talk from C to Z, probably this will be a best path. So based on a network topology, you will kind of pre-compute all the potential good paths that are possible. Then when your actual process would start, you have the slots. So in your each time slot, you will use an online algorithm to see which qubit has to go to which channel, and you do these assignments based on these pre-computed paths that you already did between the pairs. And then you do the local swapping between the qubits internally based on your link states. So the rest of the process will continue according to that. So one good thing about this design is, it also includes the offline algorithm for pre-computing a good path. And it also has an online algorithm. So dynamically based on which is your source and destination right now, you can use an online algorithm which will use the offline algorithm. They work together to do the design of your system. And also this offline computation happens at 2 times. One is at the system initialization time. And also when any network topology changes, you will have to does that again because your routing table changes. So you do this process again at the server. And they also assume that the server they're using can be honest but curious. And compared to other works, the other thing about this paper is that all the repeaters that they use and all the servers that they assume that they have, they do not have any constraints that they have to be trusted. But most of the other papers that were published before this mainly assumed that they were all trusted. But this paper says that we do not need them to be trusted. Even if they're honest but curious, we are still okay because we have the rest of the protocols taking care of the security part. So the other algorithm that they have is the QCast, which is contention-free path selection at runtime. So which means it's more dynamic in nature. And they talk about the resource, more about the resource allocation type of a thing, where you want to be contention-free, where two paths don't share the same qubit or channel because your qubits are precious. So you want to allocate only to the path that you already established. You only want to give your qubit entangled with that particular channel. So that way you make sure that any two paths do not share the same qubits. And the other thing that they do more practically is they use their non-additive metric, that is the throughput, and they use the extended Chittra algorithm to do that. They say that this works for monotonic metrics and optimized speed. And usually if it's monotonic, then you add one hop, then the path usually gets worse. But they use this algorithm to establish a better route. Let's say you have to transmit from A to B, and you have this several ways to do that. And let's say red were the ones that were failed connections. Then how do you kind of dynamically do this? Path establishment can be explained like this. So similar to what we had for the QPass, where you have the 4 phases, we similarly have the 4 phases even in this too. Let's say I want to talk from 4 to 14 or from 3 to 11, marked in highlighted in pink or highlighted in yellow. So we do the same thing in the initialization. We receive all the source and destination pairs in advance. And then in phase 2, I will try to do the entanglement locally by selecting the paths which are good for me based on the source and destination pairs. So in this phase 2, what goes different is that it, excuse me. So your routing table will have like, what is your shortest path to get there first? So it will be sorted according to that, according to the distance first. So from going from 4 to 14, what is the shortest wave? Maybe like 4, 10, and 14 is shortest, or maybe 4, 6, 8 will be longer, or so something like that. You have all that, so you have them sorted in ascending order. And then you will have to pick the best one among them. Now, the other thing this has along with that is how much qubits and how many channels each of these paths will occupy. That will also be written in your routing table. And you can choose a specific metric as what is of priority to you. You can choose one of those metric and do the sorting according to that. And then you will see that this is which is the shortest, which is probably uses the least number of qubits or least number of channels to do the routing. You will use such a path, and then you will keep on repeating this process until you kind of cover all of the paths and no other alternate paths should be available. You kind of cover all of them and you put them in your table and you sort them accordingly. And while this is one major thing, the other thing that happens here is such connected ones are called the major links. That those are the good links, those are the best possible routes to get, like maybe like 4, 10, and 14 is probably good over here. So this will be on top of my table. But you'll also have some partial paths. So for example, the grade ones are like not completely connected or not maybe the best connections. Maybe they have like an indirect way of getting there. So these things are also noted because those are called as partial paths. So just in case the major links fail, then instead of trying to reformulate everything all over again, they just use these partial paths for recovery, and they can quickly adjust their routing information and continue to do the routing. So this is another extra thing that the QClass does. And in phase 3, the same thing continues. Now I have all these additional information. I will exchange my link state within my K-hop neighbors. And in the phase 4, I will connect all these existing local entanglements like this one and establish a full connection. So this is how the QCast works. And one additional thing that this QCast does is the path repair, like I was talking about the partial paths. I'm just going to say very briefly, I just put out the whole figure, but it is quite straightforward. But let's say I have to talk from A to B, and I have so many other links to get there. Let's say that my primary link was this A, C, D, E, B, but unfortunately the red ones are they were gone. They were disconnected, they were down for some reason. So C to D, this connection is not existing, and E to B, this connection is also kind of down. So I need to quickly come up with some other way to get there. So I say that A, F, E, B is probably the next best route that I have, but I need to do all this kind of establishing the qubit entanglements, etc. again. So what we do is first we go from E to F. We see this is done, and then the best way to get there is F to E, and then but I don't have a direct connection from E to B because this link is down, and I don't have any other channel as backup. So I will see what's the next. So I go from E to D, then D to G, G to H, and then from H to B because that's the only connection between that B has with any other node anymore. So I get there. So to do this kind of calculation at the phase 4, especially when I have to do this internal entanglement, they use XOR. So for example, they first do AC, then CD, DE, and then for EB, they kind of try to do an XOR from EB to AF, and they come up with this kind of a path. So that way, while doing XOR, they say that dynamically they are able to come up with the partial paths, the backup paths, so they can recover way faster. Theoretically, they say that this XOR it works faster for them. So this is the other advantage of using this QCast algorithm. So not only does it dynamically make decisions, but also it tries to do the path repair based on a more practical XOR formulation. So between the two protocols, the QPass and QCast that they've proposed, what's the difference is just quite simple. Let's say we have to talk between A and B, and we have to also communicate from A prime to B prime. These are my source and destination pairs that I have. So what the QPass would typically do is it would first look at A prime to B prime, and it says, okay, this is the best way to probably get there, and it will try to route, because QPass does offline routing. It tries to put all the possible combinations that it has into the table. So it tries to say that this is the way to go there. So if you see there are 25 hops in between, it tries to put this in the routing table. Now, when you see all the qubits that are there in each node, for M1, you had 2 qubits. Those are already consumed if I have to establish this path. So this entire thing will get entangled, and there are no more qubits left at all for me to do any other communications. So this is where it gives up. So QPass algorithm just writes this one, and it says from going from A to B, I don't have any qubits left. All are already consumed. So this will fail. So there are no more offline paths. That's what it says. So when the actual transmission starts, any communication from A to B will not happen because it's not at all updated in my table. Whereas if you use the QCast, because it's more dynamic in nature and it does not rely on any offline routing at all. So what this does is, let's say the first step of A prime to B prime using these 25 hop was already populated in the routing table. However, there's a residual graph where this QCast will try to find an alternative path to get to B. So it sees that A to B prime to B, this is a path, and also A prime B is another path. So it tries to find these more paths, though dynamic, which are not already there. And it tries to say that these are also existing. And then it tries to do the allocation of the qubits. So these paths actually are kind of worse than this M25, M2, etc. by metric, but these were not already recorded by the offline QPass. So that's the advantage of using the QCast. It's a smarter way of resource allocation, as well as more dynamic way of choosing your paths. So these are the two algorithms that this paper proposes. And using these, I will get to some simulations. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. So they use a simulation here, and they use the QPass and QPass. There are two algorithms. that they proposed, and they compare it with two other algorithms. One is the single link multipath routing that was a previously submitted paper by other authors for the quantum information. And the other is a greedy algorithm, which is also a quantum networking related paper where this is basically a distributed protocol. SLMP is more like a circuit switching style kind of routing that they use. So they use these two as the baselines. And for evaluation, they look at the throughput because that's the main metric that they're measuring. And the other thing that they measure is the recovery algorithms. They want to know how well, if one link is down, how well will it dynamically use other partial paths to recover from such a failure. So they use these two things to evaluate. And the reference setting that they use are so, N being your how big your network is, your number of nodes, and EP will be your average channel success rate, and Q will be your internal link success rate, like internally the entanglement that you do, and K will be your the K hop, that is your nearest neighbors, and ED will be your average degree that you use, and M over here is the number of source and destination pairs that you use. So they're using these kind of reference setting for their simulations. And for the evaluation, they see that the throughput for all these four algorithms, in that the QCast is much better. It has 4 EPS better compared to its own other algorithm, the QPass, and it is way better than the other baseline algorithms. You see that this is the most reliable because even in like almost any case, you see that the throughput is always greater than at least 5 EPS. So here, though, this greedy algorithm also kind of enjoys some good high throughput, but it kind of delivers only up to 15 or some throughput at only, but the QPass delivers much more throughput eventually for more CDF. And we see similar experiments where they try to change, they try to reduce the success rate of entanglement. They see that there is lesser success of entanglement, so the entanglement is much little. So as expected, the throughput will be much lesser for not just these, but all the quantum protocols that we have, because the entanglement is not very successful for all the links. But despite having a bad success rate of entanglement, we see that the QCast already also still has a better throughput compared to the baselines. And having the original settings, if we increase the number of nodes in your network to about 400, we see that still this paper, both algorithms have a lead compared to the other baselines. And the other things that they check is how well they work in terms of recovery and etc. So let's say throughput versus the link state broadcast range. So let's say they keep changing the K. Even with different number of neighbors, even with a lot of other Ks, and with a bigger sharing range also, we see that the throughput of the QCast and the QPass are way higher compared to the other baselines. And even on changing the network size, making a huger network with probably 800 nodes also, we see that the QCast kind of outperforms all the other network sizes. And even the throughput is really high. Even at like 800 nodes, we see the throughput is almost about 7.5 APS, which is still higher compared to all the other protocols. And some other experiments that they do is to change the number of source and destination pairs given in one time slot alone. Let's say we go from 0 to 10, or 1 to 10 basically. We see that QCast has still the highest throughput. Even for the highest number of source and destination pairs, we have like a very high throughput. And how to check the recovery paths. Let's say that you have your two algorithms, the QCast and the QPass, and we have the two other versions of it. One is with recovery and one is without the recovery. With just the plain algorithm, or the other is what happens when you apply the recovery part. We see that there is still slightly better performance compared to without the recovery and with the recovery. At least to 1 EPS higher throughput can be expected by using this recovery path contributions. So these were the simulation results that we had. So finally, I will conclude the paper. So the paper we presented today showed a new entanglement routing model for quantum networks. And it had many novel attributes, especially which are very specific to quantum networks, such as the slotted time, the probabilistic link states, the non-additive metric, because using these will make more sense in quantum networks than the other papers which just use classical communication related metrics. And they also proposed two different algorithms, one which uses an offline routing, the other one which does not rely on offline but does online routing, and it also increases the network throughput by a big margin compared to all the other methods. And they also say that this is a very new area which can be explored a lot. And based on this same paper, they say that some small research topics would be to make sure that the runtime resource contention is much better, to find offline paths in a more efficient way, which are also more resilient. And also they say that for the selection of recovery loops, especially for the phase 4 of your QCast algorithm, there can be a more efficient way of selecting it instead of the way that they're doing right now. And also we see that only certain pairs get entangled and the others do not. So they have an idea that maybe the ones that are not already entangled also can be probably used in the previous time slot instead of resetting the whole network after each phase or after all the phases get over. So these are the few questions that they think that can be answered in the future. So yeah, this was my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Okay, thank you, Pavana. Let me stop the recording first, and then we can discuss.